Welcome back. You're watching Newsmaker Live with me, Kendall Burton. My guest, David Jankofsky, the regulatory consultant, doing some work with the local utility in terms of preparing for regulation, and a managing director of LUCELEC, St. Lucia Electricity Services Limited, Mr. Trevor Louisy. Before the break, we were talking about firm capacity, sources of energy, non-firm capacity, talking about geothermal as a firm capacity resource, and wind and others less reliable or fluctuating sources of energy. I'm curious about how that's likely to impact LUCELEC's operations from a generation perspective when we open up the market to other persons coming in and generating electricity using some of those other alternative sources.
That's where the responsibility of the grid operator becomes even more important, because you're moving away from a situation where virtually all the forms of generating capacity are under the control of LUCELEC. So LUCELEC knows at any one point in time what's coming onto the system. When you open up certain aspects of the generation market, you obviously lose some of that control. But it's not an impossible task. I don't want people to sort of get frightened. It's something that if you set up the structures and the systems, it can be managed, and it can be managed very effectively.
Just want to remind the viewers that the lines are open, so you can call in if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions. In terms of pricing, once the market is opened up, whether other companies come in to generate electricity, or a private individual or business decides to generate their own power and tie into LUCELEC's grid, who then determines, and how do you determine what rates do you charge? And what are the options that are on the table right now for consideration?
I think that's where the regulator gets involved, and perhaps I would let David respond to that question.
Well, yes. Again, as we said, you have to have a financially viable, let's call it transmission and distribution operation as well. So if the model is that any new source of generation is going to sell its electricity to LUCELEC, it has to be at a price that LUCELEC can then, a wholesale price, such that LUCELEC can add its costs to it and still resell it to customers within its overall limitations. In other words, you can't buy high and sell low, and so a regulatory authority would have to be very careful in terms of if they were authorized to set rates on these new generators, to make sure that they don't put LUCELEC in what would be called a price squeeze. That the LUCELEC would have to buy this power at a certain level per kilowatt hour, but not be able to sell it for that plus a little bit more. And quite frankly, as the director pointed out earlier in response to your question, while the cost of renewables has definitely been coming down over the past 30 or 40 years, and I've seen this around the world, in most, not all, but in most cases, they are still not competitive with the so-called traditional sources of electricity.
Okay, let's go to the phone lines. Good evening. We have a call?
Good night, Mr. Kendall Burton.
Yeah, thank you for your patience, sir.
Yes, sir. I normally exercise it when people like you, speaking to.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. My name is Gaspar Henry, and good night, Mr. Louisy. And I do not really know the other gentleman's name.
Mr. Jankofsky.
Good night.
Yeah, I'm a consumer, and I find that LUCELEC is doing a good job, I find LUCELEC also contribute to the economy in a great way. However, Mr. Louisy, my concern with LUCELEC, I find we're paying too much. We're paying too much for our electricity bills. That's one of my concerns, and my my other concern is that I find the length of years that you'll have for the on the monopoly is too long. To me, the government should give you all like a 5-year, like evaluate you all on a 5-year span instead of giving you all so many years. You know, as a monopoly, that's my only concern. But I find you all doing a good job. You know, throughout the times of the the disasters, I find you all were on the ground. You all were able to get electricity up and running. You all do a good job in that regard. But my only concern is that, you know, we're paying too much for electricity. Yeah, so I don't know if you want to address that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. In the case of the electricity rates, you want to take that on, Mr. Louisy?
Yep. This is a concern that we hear from the majority of our customers. And, you know, it's always important to put things into perspective. We do participate in a tariff survey with CARELEC twice a year. And when we looked at the results for 2013, apart from Trinidad and Tobago, our average tariff was the lowest among the other participating members. And I'm talking about members from the Cayman Islands all the way down to Grenada, and even 1 or 2 countries in South America. So I think you need to put things into perspective. We haven't got natural resources or that are in use in terms of energy production as yet, and perhaps if we get geothermal energy reasonably priced, then we will see an impact on the tariffs. But in addition to that, the caller was complimenting us in terms of our service quality and our reliability. That comes at a price. So it's almost like you want the best of both worlds. It just doesn't happen that way. We strive for service excellence and great quality, efficiency in our operations. And what we will have to do going forward is to prove to the regulator that the tariffs that we want to charge are reflective of the services that we provide.
Okay, let's take another call. Good evening, you're on the air.
Yes, hello, good evening.
Good evening.
I have 2 questions. One, what might be the impact of renewables on the price of electricity?
The impact on what?
What might be
the impact
of renewables
on the price of electricity?
Okay.
And the second question, generation planning seems to be not a simple exercise. So how does the government come up with a target on the RE mix in a given time frame? For example, the government of St. Lucia has touted a 45% RE penetration by the year 2020, I think. I just wanted to find out, was this done in consultation with the electricity company, or is there a formula that any government can use?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your call.
I'll let David answer the first question.
I'm sorry,
David
I
having
keep
some difficulty
cutting out on, maybe if you could repeat the question.
I think the first question related to the impact
of
renewable energy
on the cost of electricity.
Cost of electricity.
Yeah.
Well, again, the cost of renewables, as I think I indicated earlier, is definitely coming down, but still they are just not, by and large, competitive with traditional sources. The previous caller mentioned he liked the service, but he didn't like the price, and wants to pay less. We all want that, as you indicated, Mr. Director. But LUCELEC largely uses diesel as its fuel source because of the resources here and its geographical location. Whereas where I live, for example, we use coal. which is a lot cheaper. But LUCELEC can't be importing coal or from the United States or from other countries. So in general, the switching to renewables is something that should be continually evaluated. And over time, the cost has come down, but still they are just not cost competitive, all of the things being equal. They are getting closer, but they're not there yet. Not to mention some of the other issues of being non-firm sources of generation.
Let's go back to the phone lines. Good evening.
Hello.
Hi, good evening. You're on the air.
Yes. My concern... Good night, gentlemen.
Good night. Good night.
My concern is on the new diesel meter. After they changed the one they had, people have been paying more. The bill is very high, and I understood that all the other countries reject that meter, and it's only St. Lucia that accept it. And the bill is very high. You're not seeing what you have in your house, what appliance you have, and you're paying so much current. So that's my concern. I'll listen on the radio.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I think, as with anything, technology is advancing around the world, and the meters we used in the prior years were mechanical meters. We've now transitioned to electronic meters, which are more state-of-the-art meters. What we found with the electromechanical meters, over a period of time, they begin to slow down because you have so many moving parts in the meter. So we took a decision, and in fact the mechanical meters are virtually no longer available. And the statement that we are the only ones using these new electronic meters, that's not an accurate statement. All of the islands are moving to electronic meters. And when we were first introducing these meters, we had significant discussions with the Bureau of Standards, who did quite a bit of research before they gave us approval to bring these meters into St. Lucia.
Okay, do you have another call?
Yes, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Yeah, I have been throughout the Caribbean, and I am very much satisfied with the high level of support and the level of contribution that LUCELEC is making throughout St. Lucia, especially with latest technology and all those other facets. However, one area that I'm very much disappointed in is allowing contractors to go out and disconnect delinquent customers during the weekend and sometimes after work hours. I think one of I think LUCELEC should definitely go back to the drawing boards and at least allow those customers, sufficient time, or at least, just create some avenue where persons could go out and pay those bills, especially if their account become delinquent, where they could pay those bills maybe online or some other means, as opposed to having them without electricity from Friday evening, and the only time they get to correct this is on a Monday morning.
Is that the extent of your contribution?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. It has nothing to do with regulation, but I think we both anticipated these sort of
calls.
But
you'll be surprised that some of these things may actually find their way into service standards as part of the new regulatory environment. Right. I'm surprised that the caller has indicated that we do disconnections on a Friday. And on a weekend. I know it's company policy that we don't do the disconnections on a Friday, and we don't do disconnections on a weekend. So that's something I will have to look into as soon as I get into office tomorrow morning. In addition to that, we try to work with all of our customers. We know it's difficult economic times, and customers come in regularly and try to negotiate with us, perhaps on some extensions in terms of a few days, maybe a week, because they can't, pay their bill. But you're finding a lot of instances that the customers who haven't paid their bills for 2 or 3 months, and then it gets to the point where we obviously have to take a fairly firm decision. I was just going to. There were 2 other questions that were raised earlier that we haven't responded to.
We'll get back to them, but the calls are coming in fast and furious. We have another one actually online. Good evening.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, Mr. Louisy and your guest.
There's
a statement that Mr. Louisy made that I'm not too clear on, because I remember when they were encouraging everybody to install solar water heaters, excuse me, what they were telling, the theory they were pushing was that the startup cost for a solar water heater is high, but in the end, you are going to reap the benefits. I mean, the cost of your electricity bill will go down. But now I'm hearing Mr. Louisy saying if he were to explore those alternative sources of energy, the technology to set them up is so very expensive that it may not be practical or feasible. So why are they pushing consumers to solar and the power company still wants to remain with the traditional energy source? And the second point that I want to Mr. Louisy to say is how soon are we going to see the remote reading of the meters? Because I think it is really a problem with LUCELEC trying to come into people's premises when people are not there, and they shake your gates and they do all kinds of things like this. So can you please address those 2 queries? Thank you.
Thanks for calling.
Okay, if I convey the message that we were not supporting the move to renewable energy, I think that I was clearly misunderstood. We are saying that we support renewable energy, but people need to understand that the payback periods that some of them are anticipating, or the likely reduction in the tariffs that they're expecting, are not likely to come as quickly as possible. So that is something they need to take into consideration.
That's if it comes at all. There are countries in Europe where it's been introduced and rates have gone up.
Yes. Yeah. Because and what you find too is in a lot of these countries, the government subsidizes the persons who have installed some of these renewable energy technologies. With regards to the remote meter reading, we have actually started remote meter reading, and it's a program that, again, we trying to make sure that we don't place any significant shock on the tariff, and so we're rolling out the program over a number of years, and I would think that in the next 2, maybe 3 years, we would have installed electronic meters, throughout the island, so that we would be able to do remote meter reading.
Okay, let's take another call. Good evening, you're on the air.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Very fascinating discussion, let me say.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, power regulation is a huge issue. I'm sure many of us as consumers can appreciate that. Now, I quite understand the point being made by Mr. Louisy and Mr. Jankofsky, I think. Okay. That LUCELEC, like any other business, has to be viable. LUCELEC, like any other for-profit business, must be able to show a profit to its shareholders. But I understand too that LUCELEC is a monopoly, and that is why we need the type of regulation that the government presently undertakes. Now, 2 things. First, let me say that whilst I agree with the point that Mr. Jankowski raised, that the government, or anybody for that matter, should not look at the regulatory function of government as being interpreted to mean that the government can come in and dictate to the company how to run its business. I understand that. I agree. But by the same token, Mr. Jankowski must understand too that LUCELEC must validate at least certain of its operations to the regulator, so that at the end of the day, all the stakeholders are in a position to say, okay, we agree with what is happening, we agree with the rates that we're paying, we agree that there is nothing that LUCELEC is doing in terms of its operations which causes consumers to pay more than they ought to. Mm-hmm. That's point one. Two, and this is not necessarily for your two guests, mm-hmm. Kendall.
Yeah.
Kendall, look, you know that there is a consumer protection body, a non-governmental consumer body, mm-hmm. known as the National Consumer the NCA.
Mm-hmm. Association.
Yeah.
Association, the National Consumer Association. Thank you. You know, what I don't understand about this is, in terms of the telecommunications providers, and when we were looking at moving into competition, mm-hmm. the NCA was involved in that. In terms of the introduction of regulation for water, with the advent of the Water Commission and so on, mm-hmm. the NCA was involved in that. Now I'm hearing that the government, and I understand that the government represents consumers, but with the NCA, I believe that the government ought to have included somebody or some people from the NCA to sit in at least as observers, or to at least send in whether to the process, whether it be comments, whether it be suggestions, because there are quite a lot of things in terms of electricity generation, transmission, etc., that a lot of St. Lucians don't understand, and we would like to understand, mm-hmm. so that at the end of the day, we can say that this is being done fairly, that is being done fairly, so we're in a position to better appreciate the entire process. Mm-hmm. But when you have a situation like this, where the government is meeting with LUCELEC and its representatives, and representatives of the non-government agency, the NCA, is being left out of the loop. Mm. Let me backtrack, because I don't know for sure that the NCA was or was not invited to the talks currently being held between the parties. Mm-hmm. If the NCA wasn't invited to these talks, even in an observatory capacity, I think that that was something that should have been included on the part of the government, so that at least the non-governmental body representing consumers would have a fair idea of what is going on. And even at this late stage, Kendall, mm-hmm. I believe that is something that the government ought to consider. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
I think just to respond to that last call, if my memory serves me correctly, the NCA has participated in most, if not all, of the stakeholder sessions that have been put on by the ministry.
Yeah, just for Mr. Jankofsky's, because I know you had some difficulty with your earpiece. The caller was asking for the National Consumer Association to be involved in any discussion on regulation. So Mr. Louisy was just responding.
Yeah, they have been involved. And I think there was another sort of issue that he raised in terms of validating our operations. We have absolutely no problems with that.
Yeah, I think he made that clear earlier on.
And the present construct of the existing Electricity Supply Act makes certain provisions for that. However, the government has not put some of the bodies in place to adequately monitor some aspects of our technical operations. But it is already enshrined in the existing legislation.
Yes. We have another call. Good evening, you're on the air. Good evening.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you loud and clear. Go ahead with your contribution. And please turn on the volume of your television. It's causing a feedback. Okay, let's move on. There were a couple of questions that came on before.
Yeah, there was one in relation to the length of the license.
The monopoly.
Yeah, for the length of the license. And I think people need to understand that when you invest in a lot of power generating plant and major equipment at substations that runs into the millions of dollars, and you depreciating it over, say, a 20 or 25 year period, you would want to make sure, any business person would want to make sure that the length of their license at least gives them the opportunity to recoup that investment. So you would find that even in some of the larger countries where they're IPPs, independent power producers, before they sign a power purchase agreement for you, or as part of the power purchase agreement, it has to be valid for at least 20 or 25 years, because they want to be guaranteed that, over the period of the contract, they would be able to recover their investment. So that's one of the reasons why a fairly long license is required in the power sector. If you don't have the licenses, people are just not going to invest.
Yeah, so the 5 or 10 years that the caller was suggesting is just not practical at all.
Really practical.
Yeah, practical for one of the generation projects at all.
Let's go back to the telephone lines. Good evening, you're on the air.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
My problem is to your panel out there is with the fuel surcharge we usually pay for LUCELEC to run the operations. It is new to some St. Lucians, and even to me, that what they use is to generate the electricity. We pay for it, and at the end of the day, what we're getting out of what the diesel provide, we still pay for it. I consider if we already paying for a fuel surcharge, whatever output we get, it should have been lower. Or if not lower, we not pay for the first, but let allow the rate to stay as it is. But we're paying for the fuel, which Mr. Louisy said that helped to generate the electricity. And out of that fuel, that generation, we still pay for the electricity at that high rate. Is it not feasible for LUCELEC to look into that and see like the rate for electricity is too high after you're already paying for the surcharge, for the fuel surcharge?
Thank you.
Okay, I think it's important for me to try and explain some aspect of our operations. Fuel costs is approximately 70% of our operating costs. Okay, so you selling a product that you can predict 30% of the cost, but there's 70% of that cost that is a variable cost, and it really depends on the vagaries of the market. And when we had that initial oil shock in 1972 and 1973, it wasn't only LUCELEC. You find that with utilities across the world found that the best way of dealing with that variable fuel cost was through a fuel surcharge. I would venture to tell the caller that LUCELEC is one of the few utilities in the region that is doing fuel hedging. And what the benefit of the fuel hedging is that it removes a significant amount of the volatility in the price. So when some of my colleague CEOs are facing the media because of significant price volatility, we're not facing that level of criticism here, because we've been fairly proactive in terms of introducing a very successful fuel hedging program.
Yeah. Back to the lines. Good evening. Hello.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Hi. Good evening.
I would like to make two contributions. The first one is, isn't there a cheaper grade of fuel LUCELEC could use? And two, a couple of years ago, under Sir John Compton's reign, I could remember, hello?
Yeah, go ahead. We're hearing you.
Hello? I could remember
Sir
John giving an increase to LUCELEC when they were moving down to Colisaka, or upgrading the equipment down there to the tune of about 33%. He even fired the commission that was in charge at that time, board. And the commission refused to give the increase. And Sir John said that they wanted to buy new equipment for LUCELEC down there, and that when that equipment is paid for, we're going to get a reduction in price. And we haven't heard that yet. I'm pretty sure other people could remember that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, in relation to the cheaper grade of fuel, there is a cheaper grade of fuel that we can use, because we're using light fuel oil. We can use heavy fuel oil. What it would necessitate, though, is for us to make a significant capital investment in some of the plant at cul-de-sac, so that they can use that new grade of fuel. About 8 years ago, we did a study, and it was sort of marginal in terms of whether it was going to be beneficial to the customers. But at that same time, the price differential between heavy fuel oil and light fuel oil narrowed significantly. So it sort of changed the equation, and the benefits were no longer there. We are using light fuel, and there's some of our neighbors in the other utilities that are using heavy fuel oil, and because of the efficiencies that we've introduced into our system, our tariffs are lower than theirs. In relation to the comment that the gentleman made regarding Sir John and the PUC back in the early 1990s, at the time, I think Sir John made that decision. The company was struggling. We couldn't pay our bills. And Sir John, I think, had the foresight to understand that for the country to continue to develop, he needed a viable electric utility. And he made that decision, and I think not just the utility, but the country and customers at large are still benefiting from that decision. The comment about when you've paid for that equipment, then you'd see a tariff reduction. You find that in our business, you have to continuously invest in your business. Our average capital expenditure is something like about $35 to $40 million a year. And when we're going into major capital investment in terms of putting in a new plant, that can jump to $75 million. Just about 2 years ago, we had to spend something like $100 million in capital expenditure. So what you're finding is every so often you have to make that major injection of capital into your business so that you can continue to maintain the system at a reasonable level and continue to provide for increasing demand. So we have been able to keep what we traditionally call our base tariff, which is the tariff less the fuel surcharge. That has remained steady since about 2006. And all of the changes that customers are seeing relate directly to the vagaries of the fuel market.
You another call?
Yes, you do.
Hi. Thanks for holding on.
You're welcome. I was listening to the manager of LUCELEC, and I was stunned. First of all, I'd like to say that I represent a sector on the island who I believe consume more fuel than LUCELEC, and they do not have the luxury. And they do not have the luxury of a fuel surcharge. So I don't know how that works. It seems it's only the big companies that can get what I call this luxury. But further to that, Mr. Moderator, did I hear the manager correctly when he said that down the years, those meters, in fact, implying that we are being robbed currently by the new meters? Did I hear correctly? Because that's the time I tuned in. So I would like to know if he's suggesting that the meters they are now installing on people's houses are in fact turning faster. The numbers are going higher, and down the years that the meter will slow down. Is that what I heard?
You guys correct there, Mr. Louisy.
Yeah, what I said was the electromechanical meters, because they have so many moving parts, you would find that over the years they would begin to slow down. We had meters on the system that were over 15 and 20 years, and we instituted a policy where we would go in and replace these meters. The new meters that are available on the market now are the electromechanic meters, which are more accurate. They are not susceptible to things like the vibrations and the dust. They just don't have as many moving parts as the older meters. So what you find now is that individuals are having their consumption more accurately measured.
But I'll tell you something, I shouldn't be saying that, but in order to strengthen my point, I will tell you that an employee of LUCELEC agreed with me that those meters, they do not give an accurate reading, meaning the consumers are getting the short end of the stick. I'm not going to tell you who.
No, you don't have to. You don't have to tell me.
That is the truth. That an employee of the company told me that those meters are in fact forcing consumers to pay more. You can take it the other way because it's in defense of your company, stating that in fact the other meter was slowing down. But I'm telling you, the opinion of your staff is that those current meters are making it easy for LUCELEC to collect more money. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No, I think like I said earlier, Mr. Burton, when we were bringing in these meters, we had to get approval from the Bureau of Standard. And they gave us a pretty tough time. I can tell you, we had to get standards and tests done in Australia. So it was not an easy process. We didn't just bring these meters in and start using them without getting the approval of the Bureau of Standards. So,
but like you said, you didn't hear the entire comment from you or statement from you.
Yeah.
So we'll excuse him on that point. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
Hi.
Hello, good night.
Good night.
Our final call, so make it fast.
Yeah, good night.
Good night.
Yeah, good night to Mr. Burton and to the group there. First of all, I would like to compliment Mr. Fletcher and the government of St. Lucia for bringing in the regulatory commission. Although the company is a very efficient company, I still find they have exploited the consumer for years, and they have made millions of dollars of profit. And all we work for is to work for LUCELEC. So I think it's high time that they bring in these other forms of energy, so that we have competition, the price of electricity can be dropped. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously, he hasn't been paying attention. But I want to give you the opportunity to answer an earlier question about the 35%
penetration.
I
think the question was, the government was speaking earlier about 20% penetration of renewables. And then I think earlier this year, the Prime Minister raised the figure to 35%.
Yeah.
And the caller was asking whether there were any studies.
Was there any consultation with the
with the company
and a formula to
right,
arrive
and a formula to arrive at that? And I smiled during that question because yesterday I had the opportunity to sit in on one of the sessions that David was having, and he was talking. We were talking about regulatory impact assessments, and he was saying you can't just shift the goalposts without doing an impact assessment, and also looking at what the risks are associated with making that shift. So perhaps, David, you've been quiet for a while, so maybe you might want to.
Well, I see the problem of being a utility executive. Everybody wants to have their say, and I congratulate you on the show. But the push towards renewables is being done in good faith by everyone around the world. The problem is, once again, that that, as I stated, renewables are just not quite yet competitive with traditional sources of power. So governments around the world try to help jumpstart or grow industries to force people to go into renewables. So perhaps there will be some economies of scale, and by so doing, prices will come down. And I've seen many governments that have set renewable targets of 20, 25, 35%, just frankly based on picking a number out of the air, saying that by a certain date we will have 25% of our power or of our electricity generated by renewables. And there probably should be a little bit more analysis than that goes into these types of targets. I'm trying to understate a little bit, Mr. Director.
Gentlemen, unfortunately we're out of time, but I want to thank you both for being with us this evening. Mr. David Jankofsky, pleasure meeting you.
My pleasure.
I'd like to see the next time you're on island, feel free to come across, and we'll be happy to have you again.
Thank you.
Mr. Trevor Louisy, first time on Newsmaker Live, hopefully not your last. I appreciate you being here. And as the discussion progresses, hopefully we can have you back again to discuss regulation.
I'm sure I'll be back. Sure I'll be back.
You're welcome. Yeah. And to those of you who called, thanks for calling, for watching. Thanks again. Join us next week for another program. Until then, I'm Kendall Burton. Good night.